Hello. I thought today I'd let my mind meander gently through a few thoughts that have been going through it this past 2 or 3 days. Last week, the wife and I were sitting at the breakfast table doing the word puzzle, the telegraph word puzzle, as is our wont during breakfast. And Classic FM were playing the Elgar cello concerto, the first two movements. And within about 10 bars or so of the started playing, I said to the wife, that isn't Jacqueline Dupre. And it wasn't. It was a fine player, Japanese player, fine player, but it wasn't Jacqueline Dupre. And that got me wondering about how did I know? How did I, as a non-playing, non-instrument playing person, know it wasn't Jacqueline Dupre? Now, I have sung in choir and as a solo voice for many years, but how is it that I could tell that it wasn't Jacqueline Dupre? Was it the resonance that somehow she can get from an instrument that no one else seems quite to match? Was it the phrasing? Was it the tempi? Was it the dynamics? I don't really know. And musical people out there will know a lot more than me in that respect. But I always know, as does my wife, and she does play an instrument. But I thought it's something, how can we tell? What is it that Jacqueline Dupre does that no one else quite does? And eventually, through musing, I thought, I've got it. And I said to Marie, I've got it. She doesn't, let's pretend that Elgar's written the notes on this side of the paper. So he's sat here and he's written the notes to the cello concerto. So there we have notes. It's Elgar here and the notes are there. And Jacqueline Dupre is here with her instrument, and she's looking at those notes and taking those into herself. Her brain is organizing her fingers and her body to replicate those notes, except that somehow with her, it doesn't happen like that. It's not a series of thoughts and emotions and being symbolized, tokenized almost, and her taking those tokens or symbols and then translating through her own brain that movement, that sounds into her instrument. It's as though somehow she enters into the music. Somehow she goes through the notes, through the paper, into the mind of Elgar. There's a sort of there's a connection. And I realized, I called it a sort of a kind of incarnational moment. It's not symbols and tokens. It makes a difference. It's a perfect union. And between Elgar and Jacqueline Dupre, without people in between. And that then got me thinking about Cardinal John Henry Newman. Born in 1801, died in 1890. He overlapped Elgar to some extent, but I don't think they ever met. But he was a very, very clever man, a poet, historian, philosopher, theologian, and graduated from Oxford and became an Anglican clergyman, and was part of the High Anglican Church and became a leading force in the Oxford movement of the early 1800s, when there was a movement to try and get Anglicanism it was called the evangelical wing, to try and get Anglicanism back closer to its Catholic roots which had been torn asunder, really, during the time of Henry VIII with his marital problems, and continued then through the centuries. So by the time you get to 1800, there was a definite rift between Catholics and Anglicans, which wasn't good for either party, to be frank. And so there was this movement to try and get them closer. And John Henry Newman was part of that. And he was a hymn writer as well. He wrote Praise to the Holiest in the Height, and what was the other? Forgotten now. And he wrote poetry, and one poem was called The Dream of Grantius, and features an elderly man who dreamt that he had died and then followed his journey through the various the various eschatological processes, I suppose you'd call it, that the Catholic Church see as the progress of the soul through judgment and into a teaching area, which is purgatory. It's a time where the souls of sinners like me are purged and made pure and holy, so that anyone there is able, after time, to enter the presence of a merciful but awesomely holy God, whose presence we can't stand in, until we ourselves are much purer than we are. I think that's possibly the gist of it. It's to do with the nature of God. He is purity. He is love. It's to do with the being of God. God doesn't have characteristics like we do. He said that to Moses, didn't he? When Moses says, "What's your name?" And God said, "I am who I am." He's saying to Moses, "I am being." So he doesn't have attributes and characteristics like us. He is grace and so on, and is love. Anyway, Cardinal Newman wrote this poem, and Elgar, who was a Catholic, set it to music. And incidentally, he said of that music, "This is the best of me." That was premiered, I think, in about 1904 or thereabouts in Birmingham. The first performance didn't go too well, but from then onwards, it's been more and more appreciated as the years go by. I first sang it in 1972. Never done the solos in it, but I've sung chorus, semi-chorus many times. In fact, about 20 times in total, and been very fortunate. I didn't enjoy it the first time because I was brought up a Methodist and didn't understand the Catholic way of thinking. I didn't understand their traditions and their particular theology. And so my eyes were opened, and my ears and my heart were opened as I got to know this piece. And Elgar's music and those words go together just as Elgar's music and Jacqueline du Pré went together. And when I sang that and sing that and hear it now, I can feel that connection between Sir John Henry Newman, or Cardinal Newman, saint now. He's a saint now. He's sainted about, 4 or 5 years ago. And myself and Elgar. And those are just beautiful. We'll call them incarnational moments when, as people, through words, through music, through the sacraments, can get closer. Here we live in a material world, but we see and understand that there is a transcendent world above. And there's a very, very fine line between the two. The Holy Spirit, we understand, possibly lives this side of it more than that, but the Holy Spirit can go through that barrier in ways that we will eventually at death. And the sacraments are are just underneath that barrier. And at that point, we can feel, and I understand the Catholic idea of transubstantiation. It is a point at which heaven and earth can touch, and our bodies can be renewed, just as through music and poetry and these moments that Jacqueline Dupre had with Elgar's music. Points where we can ourselves transcend this material restrictions of our present life. Thank you for listening, and I may come back with more of these musings. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all.